got involved in the prison writing workshop about 5 years ago. Initially, Jennifer Bowen Hicks taught one class at Lionel Lakes, and it was just so incredible that she opened it up and asked if anyone else might be interested. And I had been thinking about this for a while, actually, and attended the meeting, and she organized a meeting between the ed directors of a number of the facilities and those of us who were interested in being teachers. And Pat Pavlik, who was from the Stillwater facility, talked about her writers, and it just clicked with me, and I was like, I want to go there. I want to teach this class. So I started out by teaching a telling your story class. So personal essays, basically, is how we started. And it was just such an incredible experience. We were locked in a room together, and it was very focused and concentrated. And so I found that it also impacted my own writing. And a lot of the people in my class were experienced writers and very good writers. And I was really astounded at some of the work they were sharing. So it was just an astonishing moment of connecting with these people as writers rather than thinking about the fact that they were incarcerated. The walls kind of melted away, and we were just a group of writers writing together. And that was, like I said, 5 years ago. And we all started out as volunteers, and then as time went on, we became a nonprofit organization. So now we're called the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, and we've been teaching in all 7 facilities in the state, everywhere but Red Wing, the juvenile facility. There's 20 of us who are instructors, and we teach the craft of writing. So fiction, short stories, children's books, poetry. Speculative to fiction is actually very popular. And then my niche has often been personal essays. And tomorrow night we have our annual reading where we, those of us who are instructors and mentors and family members, read on behalf of the incarcerated writers. So it's an opportunity for them to have their work read aloud in public, which as a writer, I know how important that is. It's so gratifying when you get to have a chance to have your work in public and have people hear it. And then another thing that Jennifer thought up, which I think is so fantastic, is the members of the audience are given postcards to respond to the work. And they can write to that particular writer with how their work impacted them. And then the writers get a stack of postcards a few weeks later from people in the audience. So there's also, they get to hear how their work was received, which is really, really remarkable, I think. And helps them hang on, helps them to believe in themselves as writers and to keep writing. So that's kind of the beginning of how the group got organized. There's also a mentoring program that's connected to what we do. And the mentoring program is a group of people who are mentors. So they don't go inside the facilities, but they receive work through the mail. And they critique it and give feedback and give their ideas and guidance to the mentee that they're working with. And we have 40 mentors in all genres. And there's been hundreds and hundreds of pages of work that has been critiqued and feedback given and sent back. And so we're also seeing that people who have taken our classes, if they take more than one, we see how their work is improving and growing.
So what was it that attracted you at the beginning?
Well, I think that I always took very seriously the words in the gospel when Jesus said to feed the hungry and visit the sick and visit those who are in prison. And back in the 80s, I was actually the sponsor of the Chicano Club at Oregon State Penitentiary, and being a sponsor meant that they could only meet if they had outsiders come in. So I was one of two people, and I just had to be there. Just had to show up in person, and I was this like skinny little blonde young woman in this room full of Chicano convicts, and they just treated me like gold. They were wonderful. They were so appreciative and so respectful, and I was very, very impressed by that experience. And so when I came to the Twin Cities, I was just thinking about ways that I could serve the community, ways I can bring light into dark places, thinking about those who are forgotten, who are invisible, whose voices are not heard. And so I just started thinking about people who are incarcerated, and especially now, because as a writer, now everything is done through the internet. So now you submit things through Submittable on the internet, and that's how you contact literary journals, and that's how you create a circle, rather than doing things through the mail. And so if you don't have that access, it's very, very difficult. So I just wanted to provide some way that people could express what's on their hearts and minds, and know themselves, and build relationships, be able to build relationships with other people and that they live with, family members, community, and writing is a way to do that. I believe in the power of writing to really transform our lives, and the power of words. We've had the experience of another thing that we do is what we call forums. So we go inside one of the facilities and we make a circle, and it's those of us who are instructors and incarcerated writers who want to participate, and we have a topic that we all talk about, and it's a circle of writers talking about writing. And there was one man, I'll just never forget it, he said, "Now when I talk to my family on the phone, I share poems with them." And it's just stuff like that. It's just, yeah.
You said that sort of being in a locked room had a tendency to focus the mind.
Yes.
Can you say a little more about that?
Yes. I mean, the first class that I taught was actually, we were locked in a room together, and there was a bubble, which is this glass. There's a glass so the guards can see out, but they're not in the room with us. It's just me and the writers. And everything just is very concentrated in that moment. And we're given training, so we realize that these are people that have gone through some really hard things in their lives, and writing also can stir things up. You never know what's going to come up, but they want to be there. I mean, that's the other thing that's so incredible, is that once in a while you get a student who just wants to get out of a cell and just check it out. But my first class in particular, they were kind of handpicked. So they've taken self-development classes, they've taken other writing classes, they might be working on their degree, they might be involved in restorative justice, but basically they want to be there, and they're like sponges, they just soak it up. And so, you have to try to do your best as an instructor, and also you are just interacting, and they're asking questions, and just really focused, really concentrated and focused. And this is really deep. You're in this deep state for those 2.5 hours. And then that's my particular experience. So at other facilities, for example, at Oak Park Heights, they're in the computer lab, so people might be walking through. It's a little bit of a different environment. When I did the restorative justice class, I started out with the explanation of that we were going to write about times that we ourselves have felt intimidated or felt lost. And so before I went to that class, I always said I don't want to know what crimes they've committed. And Stillwater is a facility, it's level 4, so it's 20 years on up. So it's serious level crimes that have happened. And I never wanted to know the details. I just wanted to interact with them as writers. But the restorative justice class, I knew that possibly I was going to hear more about what actually happened. And it didn't make any difference. It didn't make any difference in how we interacted as writers. But it was a different kind of experience for me. It was much more emotional and much more personal in many ways. And but again, just that you're writers, so you're always pulling it back. I'm not a therapist. I believe writing can help us heal, and I believe writing is a therapeutic tool, but I'm not a therapist. So people reveal things that have happened to them, traumas that have happened to them, and I can say, I'm sorry that happened, and let's take a pause and let's take a breath, and I know this is a hard thing, but let's go back to the writing. So let's work on that description. Let's work on that dialogue. I want to know more about, the next thing that happened, or how you can describe that, or, kind of back to the craft of writing. And because the craft of writing is really the context, it, in some ways, it actually gives us so much freedom, to find the words, to put the words on the page. So it's, yeah. It'd be very, very extraordinary.
You say a little more about the arc of the restorative justice class?
So I went into that class with the realization that many of the writers have very, very deep remorse, and they want to find a way to contribute somehow to society. They want to feel connected again. And some of them have participated in restorative justice, so they may not have interacted with their actual victim, but they've maybe interacted with other people who are victims of a similar crime. And what I said to them in the beginning was, you can't just say you're sorry. That's not enough for your victim. There needs to be a realization that you've changed. And what we want to do through the process of having it wasn't just the writing, but we were going to have a reading during National Victim Awareness Week. That during that reading, I want you to show what your healing story is. Who have you become? Who are you now? And for your victim to know, you're not the person you were, that you've changed. And that's what I believe can create those bridges between people. And so we started out with writing about times they had felt intimidated, and I learned, some of their heartbreaking childhood stories. The child who was locked in a closet for days at a time, and the child who was beaten, and these kind of stories that were just like I said, really heartbreaking. And then I asked them to write the impact of their crime on their families, the impact of the crime on their victims' families, and the impact of the crime on their victim. And it was just really deep work. At the end, we had a reading, and the reading was by invitation inside Stillwater, and Victim Services was invited, Restorative Justice was invited, a commissioner came, staff people, therapists, social workers, and other inmates came, and also some of the instructors from MPWW. And it was just the most transformative experience I've ever been part of. I just felt just really honored to be there. We started out with reading our stories of times that we had been intimidated, and someone had written about, when he was in school, in elementary school, this little girl used to pick on him all the time. So it kind of started off a little bit of humor. But when they got the fourth person who read, we were on the topic of how they had impacted their families, and he broke down on stage, at the podium, and then pretty soon they were all passing the Kleenex up and down amongst themselves. They were all crying and just really vulnerable and really open. And then slowly everybody in the audience ended up in tears also. It was just really powerful and really moving. And the basic thing was, we've all gone through really hard, tough things, and yet there's the resiliency of the human spirit, and there's the desire to give something back, and there's a desire to be a better person. And quite a few of my writers have said there was that moment, often in segregation it happened, where they hit complete rock bottom, and they're like, if I don't change, I'm going to die. And here, this is it. This is the moment. I need to change. I am going to change, and I'm gonna take those classes. I'm gonna, get involved in learning about myself and bettering myself and working toward my degree. And I don't want to pass this legacy on to my children. And it's just, it's the, the arts. I mean, it's writing, but it's the arts. I really truly believe that the arts help us to really know who we are and to reach for the highest that we can be.
You mentioned that this experience has had an effect on your writing. Could you say more about that?
Well, I think one of the things that happens when you're writing with people who have very, very vulnerable, very powerful stories, that the crap kind of falls away, and you're just able to access a deeper part of yourself. It's like the fluff and the bullshit, just, they're not attractive at all anymore. They just kind of go away, and you want things to be real. You want to be more real in your writing. You want to be more honest. You want to be more true. You want to be more truthful, and you want to take more risks. And they're taking risks all the time. And even in the restorative justice class, they didn't actually write about their crime. They didn't describe it or write about it directly head on, because it was more about the impact. But they're just taking this enormous risk of, in the first place, saying, yes, this is what happened, and I'm responsible for it happening. So, yeah, it just makes you want to do better and be more truthful.
Do you think the truth sells?
Well, that's interesting that you asked that question, because that was one of the questions that was asked in that class. Like, if I tell this truth, who's going to want to hear it? And the answer is, it's all about the craft. So that's another hat that I wear in that class. We're not just talking about, our emotions and the experience we went through, but how do we craft it so it's an excellent story, so it's a universal story, so it opens up. So that goes back to, dialogue and description and pacing and sentence structure and what works and what doesn't work. I have like a set of really basic questions for critiquing, and we critiqued in small groups and we critiqued as a large group. They were in the really fortunate position of being able to meet in between and critique each other's work. So there was a lot of that, like, this is going off on a tangent, or this is I need more information here, or better description, or how finish that thing that you started there. And it's the craft of writing, and the craft of writing takes, to me the stories I love are the stories that take an ordinary moment and make them extraordinary through the lens of paying attention. And so that, to me, is what writing's about. We just take things that happen in our lives and show them through the lens of our writer's subjectivity, really, to make them beautiful and to make them astonishing, or to make them touch people's hearts, or touch our soul in some way.
I spoke to someone who taught convicts in Stillwater a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the picture that he was painting was of this little group being a kind of underground or resistance within the prison. I mean, it was there wasn't anything dangerous about
Right.
it, but they saw themselves as, including the instructors, everybody saw themselves as in opposition to, as an alternative to the prison culture.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
At one point, an edict came down against hugging,
Right.
and
Yep.
so
Yep.
the guys came wearing signs that said, "Don't hug me, I am being dehumanized."
Okay. Right.
So that was kind of the spirit of the
Yeah.
relationship between the guys in that little bubble
Right.
and this group.
Yep. Yep.
I guess I know that this is a sensitive matter, so don't say any more than you want to, but is that the spirit today, or have things shifted?
Well, I think we all believe that the prison as an institution is not working very well. Recidivism's still high. Even when we do our training, the guard who trains us says recidivism is still high, and we want anything that can possibly help bring it down. And when you guys are meeting in classes, at least they're not stuck in the cell together, and that's when there's less aggression and incidents. Mm-hmm. So we love it that you're here and that you're providing this service. The ed directors love us too, because they see the impact on the men and the women. I think there's always going to be a sense of, I wish I could use this writing to bring these walls down. I think there's, we've been asked to look at legal documents, and, I'm working on my appeal or whatever, but we don't do that kind of writing. We're doing creative writing. So we are very determined not to be political. We're very determined to keep a very beautiful relationship with the DOC, a very respectful relationship. So we follow the laws and rules and regulations and do the training and communicate, and we don't encourage any misbehavior, and I haven't really seen that myself. What I've seen is, like I said, people who've been writing for a long time, mostly, some beginner writers, but people that want to tell their story for some reason. They want their children to know who they are. They want to leave a legacy. They want to get it off their chest. They want to find a way to communicate with the outside world, and that's sort of more the focus than this is creating some kind of dissonance. I see it really kind of more the opposite, more like we're banding together because we know the arts make our lives better. Things improve. when we have art.
Well, and the thing you're also telling me, if I get you right, is that from the standpoint of the directors of education in this place, is anything that they think might help
Yep.
these people to reintegrate into society and not come back
Yes.
when their sentences are done,
Yep. Yep.
is welcome
Yes.
within the framework of the rules and regulations
Yep.
of the place.
Yep.
That's a sort of
Yeah.
surprise to me.
Yeah, I mean, we've been really, I don't know if it's just the timing, I don't know if it's, changes that have happened. I mean, I've heard there was a time when there were programs and then the program stopped, and I don't know, different things have happened at different times. But right now, each facility has their own ed director, and some are more supportive than others. Some really, it's like, oh, writing class, or, guitar class, or, whatever, any kind of class, that's good. But we have a couple of ed directors that are really behind us. They really love what we're doing, and they really support it, and they try to make it happen as much as possible. For example, Stillwater has a writers collective now, and we're trying to start writers collectives in every facility. And the writers collective in Stillwater, we're trying to form it into a collective before we came. In fact, it was just coincidental that they were saying, we really want this to be under the ed department, and MPWW offered a class. Just happened to be synchronistic. And as a writers collective, they have an open mic going on now. So once a month, there's an open mic opportunity where people can sign up to come, and they can read their work, and they can hear other people's work, and those of us who are instructors and mentors can come in and share our work as well. And that just speaks to, the ed director's, really her determination to educate people in any way that's possible. And not every facility is quite as organized as they are, but she knows the guys, and she's known them a long time, for the most part. And you have to earn the privilege to be in our classes. It's not just open to any person in the whole facility can sign up necessarily, but they've earned the privilege because they've been on good behavior, and they've demonstrated that they can follow through. So there's some aspect of that too.
So, what kind of a bite does this work take out of your own life?
Well, yeah. So when we teach a class, it's between 10 to 14 weeks, and it's a lot of preparation. It's a syllabus, it's handouts, and we also take their work home and we look at it and critique it. So it's an investment of time, and I think that's we sometimes get people who say, "Oh, I'd love to do that. I'd love to come in and teach a class," but they don't realize it is quite a bit of time investment. We also help them to get pieces ready to submit for an in-house journal. So there's a journal that is, if you're in the journal, you get 2 copies of it, and it's just inside the prison. We don't sell any of their work. We can't sell anything that they've produced. So, but we help get ready for that. We make recommendations. We submit things. We also have a broadside contest every year, so we submit things for that. We have forums and meetings, and we have to go through training. And we have this annual reading. We do a fundraiser, so we're about to start our fundraiser. And it's all of us individually contact friends and family and ask them if they would be willing to donate during this month. But we also handwrite letters of appreciation to those who do. So it's a commitment.
So, can you give me? I'm thinking of somebody watching this who might be interested in working this way. Can you give me an idea of what the hours would come to in a week?
About 10 hours a week.
including instruction
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
transportation and so forth.
Well, transportation is a whole other issue. So, for example, at Moose Lake, which is a 3-hour drive, 2.5-hour drive, what we do now is we do a 3-hour intensive once every few months. So 4 of us go usually and drive together, and it's 3 hours of teaching, and then we usually meet and debrief, and then so it's an all day. It's all day. It takes all day, really.
And Stillwater would be about, what, an hour?
It's an hour, about an hour and a half. And you have to go through security, so you get there a little early. Rush City's a couple hours. Yep. So there's that too. Yep.
So figure
Yep.
a day and a half out of the work week
Yep.
for teaching a class
Mhm.
like this.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And what's the financial spine of it? How do people get paid?
Well,
What
we
kind of
are so
money
blessed
is
that we live in
involved?
Minnesota. So there is grant funding.
Uh-huh.
And we also, our artistic director and our financial director get partial salaries from the DOC. So after the restorative justice class, the DOC said submit a budget and we'll see if we can contribute to that budget. And in return, we promise 20 classes a year. But we also have got Minnesota State Art Board's grant and MRAC grants, and that's what our financial director does. Is he spends a lot of time looking for money to pay instructors. Yep. So we've been funded this past year. The instructors have been funded for the most part. The in-house journal has been funded, and the broadside contest has been funded. The mentors, however, are all volunteers. And they put in a lot of hours. They're just really dedicated people. And our mentor director, the person in charge of the mentor program, he's a volunteer also, and he puts in a lot more than 10 hours a week, I'd say. Probably twice that. Yep.
So the writers want to have some outlet to the non-prison community. How easy or hard is that?
Well, we can't do any of that for them. We can give them information. So we did have 9 of our students win the Penn American Prison Writing Contest this year, taking the top prizes this year. We have a student who published a book with the University of Minnesota last year, which was a finalist for the Minnesota Book Award. But they have to do that on their own. So it's hard because, like I said, nowadays it's all through internet. So for the most part, they can find some journals and magazines that will take work through snail mail. And there's a list. The Stillwater's Writers Collective, for example, has a list of all those journals. But usually, for the most part, there's a family member or a friend who has to do things for them. Yep.
And is the writing they're producing in Stillwater pretty much or in these various correctional facilities pretty much handwritten stuff? Or?
A lot of it is. Yep. They have limited use of the computers too. So it also depends on the facility. It depends on if they've earned the right. Depends if there's a lockdown going on. The young man who wrote the memoir that became published by the University of Minnesota was moved from one facility to another. They're not allowed to have travel drives. He lost 10,000 words that he had to rewrite. So yeah, they lose their work often, and a lot of it's handwritten. And sometimes in class, I take work home to critique, and it's written from one margin all the way to the other margin. I'm like, you've got to leave a little room for me to write my response. But yeah, I've had one student who had pieces that were cut out and pasted, and every scrap of paper was saved and used because they have to buy all that stuff too. Yeah.
And is there censorship of prison writing?
So there's some. So one of the projects that we've had is called the Early Reader, and the Early Reader was collecting work from our students that was written simply enough that a beginner writer and reader would get inspired to want to write. So there were a few pieces that were just not okay in terms of what's appropriate. We can't have anything that's too much violence or very sexual. So there were pieces that had to be edited, and I think our ed directors also, when they scan the work to send it to the mentorship program or to send it out, whatever branch they're sending it to, they kind of have an idea, I think, of what kind of things the guys are working on. We have had people have their work turned back and said it's not appropriate. I've had people in my classes that have read things, and I've told them, that as a woman, the way you're talking about women right now, it's not appropriate, and I wouldn't want you to read that in a reading. I wouldn't feel comfortable. Your female character needs to be developed in such a way that she's not a stereotype, and here's why. So we do, yeah. That's part of what we do when we mentor and coach and guide is there's some parameters of what's appropriate.
But am I hearing you right that, at least in your estimation, the parameters are pretty reasonable?
Yep.
They're appropriate. It's appropriate censorship.
Yes.
And not something sort of capricious or
No.
sort of self-serving.
No.
That's encouraging.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Well, you mentioned that some people are pretty experienced writers, and I guess I'm curious, are the people who are experienced writers, have they been pretty much writing in a vacuum? I mean, writing with no feedback, writing with no, no sense of audience for all this time? How's that work?
Some of them, yes. Some of them have been that way. Some of them have been able to take college classes, because Augsburg College offers classes, and those are mostly like research, writing research papers. It's not creative writing, right? It's more left brain college writing. But yeah, I mean, I've gone to a class where somebody comes and they have this, they're like, are you going to take homework to critique? I have 300 pages. I'd like you to look at it.
And it's handwritten.
Yes. And it's handwritten. Yeah, I mean, that can happen. Yep.
No, I'm just thinking of, novels I've read recently. In serious writing these days, and I expect even in memoir writing, I know in memoir writing, there's a research component.
Yes. Yes.
How does that work with these folks?
Well, that's very difficult. So every facility also has a library, but the amount of time they get in the library can be very limited. I mean, there's a lot of different factors when it's open, when they're available to get there, how much time they can spend there. The research it's a problem, and I know one of our instructors taught a research class. If someone who has an MFA can also be hired by the DOC to teach a college class, so that's separate from what part of MPWW. And he brought in a stack of 40 books for them to use for research because there weren't enough books in the library that covered the topics they were going to write about. It depends on what kind of research it is, if the librarian can help them or not, or someone outside can help them, or we can help them. One time I brought in a book about the Middle Ages that was like one of those kids' books with lots of photographs of pictures of what it was like the castles and the armor, and because somebody in my class was writing something that took place, and he's like, I don't know, I can't visualize parts of it. So I brought it in, he could look at it during class, and then I took it back home. So yeah, the research can be difficult. You know, sometimes just like a map. You don't have a map of the place that you're writing about. Yeah, I mean, people that actually finish something, submit it somewhere, and get it accepted, that's a huge amount of dedication. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the last time I talked to somebody who was working in prison, the deal was that everybody knew that everybody in the class would never get out. It was that kind of a class. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
And so
Right.
it was a very different thought than the thought that part of what we're doing when we write this stuff is preparing for going back to the real
Right.
world or making a connection
Right.
with the world outside of prison.
Yep.
And I'm wondering how that thought of, I'm going to get out of here someday,
Yes, well,
comes in to what you're doing.
yes. So we actually have a reentry program. There's a lot of components to what MPWW does. The reentry program is for people that have gotten out to meet together and to bring work they're working on and critique it and talk about, writer topics. And we also have an arrangement with the Loft that our guys get scholarships to take classes at the Loft. So if they get out in this area, and there's a lot of people that get out all parts of Minnesota, they're not necessarily close enough to take a Loft class, but that is an option for them. Yeah, and we encourage them as much as possible. We just keep it up. We have one of our former students who's now a board member. He's been accepted in Waterstone Review and did a reading. He has a chapbook coming out from Redbird Chapbooks, and he's doing everything he can in the community to keep his writing developing and creating an audience, and it's fantastic. So you have to want it just like a regular writer, just like any writer, just like myself. I have to constantly be looking for those opportunities and those doors.
Well, how do you see your future with this thing? I mean, are you imagining yourself kind of just continuing to do this and developing your class, or are you getting new ideas, or how's it going?
So, I've tried all kinds of things. So I started out with telling your story, which is kind of personal writing, and the restorative justice is certainly personal writing. I've also taught a fiction class. I've taught a class that was based on using the book Blues Vision, so that was our text. And that was really awesome. I had a black writer who said, I didn't know there were black writers in Minnesota. It just totally blew his mind. He was so thrilled. We had a grant that year to bring in other writers from local writers to come in. So writers were interacting with our students. And I taught, at the last class I taught at Shakopee, the women's prison, was about writing about our ancestors. And my idea was, I don't really know who my ancestors are. So this will be like, we can try to trace our ancestors through like foods that we grew up eating, or family traditions, or things we did as children, but we can make them up if we want to. It doesn't have to be our actual true ancestors. And I ended up with a couple of Native American women in my class, and they were just having this great time writing about their traditions. And I had somebody who was like, I don't know, I just had ordinary ancestors, and then she ended up with this wonderful story about gardening and how her grandmother had gardened and her mother had gardened. And so you never know where it's going to go, but I like coming up with a new idea. My latest thing I've gotten excited about is flash creative nonfiction. So there's flash fiction, which I don't know how to teach because I'm not that great at short stories. I'm good at short memoir or short creative nonfiction, but I find short stories hard to write. I write longer pieces. I write novels. But flash creative nonfiction is creative nonfiction that's 750 words or less. So that's my new thing I'm going to teach. Start figuring out how to teach. So another thing is, as an instructor and as a writer, you're teaching things. Sometimes you're stretching yourself, so you're learning a new skill. You're learning more about writing. You're learning what works. And I also try to find opportunities, take workshops, and went to North Woods and took a workshop with Rebecca Brown last year, and I just took a writer's retreat with Karen Herring at Wisdom Ways, and I just keep trying to develop myself as a writer so I can bring more to the classroom. Yeah, I love doing it. I love to teach. It's really gratifying to me.
The United States is incarcerating a lot of people, which means partly that there must be programs like the one you're involved in happening in some way all over the country, and of course all over the world, really.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's a network. If ideas from
Right.
Colorado or California, my friend John used to say, you say the way you find out what you're going to have to worry about in Minnesota next year is you look at what they worried about in California 2 years ago.
Yeah. There's a little bit. AWP that was here in Minnesota had several panels about writing in community spaces, and some of it was about writing in prisons. I think there's going to be some kind of network created, but I don't know if it was. It was hosted through a literary journal, which I can't remember the details, but so in the beginning I said, I'm so grateful that we're in Minnesota because there is money here for the arts, and there has been money for our program. And last year we did a fundraiser, and we did raise quite a bit of money because you have to also match some of that money for the grants. But in a lot of states, what my understanding is, it's volunteers. So I know in California, Ellen Bass teaches in the prisons, and I get her newsletter, so sometimes she's looking for other instructors, and it's all volunteer. And I know I've connected with a women's poetry listserv and mentioned writing in prisons, and some people have contacted me back, and it was all volunteers. So we are just in this really unusual position that we're able to actually pay our instructors at this point. And that means that we've been able to hire writers of color as instructors, and that was a big push for us to do, to include writers of color, because of course our population is very diverse. But in terms of who's available to volunteer that many hours, is not as many people can do that.
Thinking about the prison population, obviously there's another population outside of prison that's headed for prison. That their teachers look at them and say, this guy's going to be in Stillwater in 5 years and 10 years. Just statistically. So I'm guessing that some of the people you're talking to are going to be pretty concerned to interrupt that in the next generation. To keep these kids, their 14-year-old selves from going down those roads.
Yep.
Anything
Yes.
happening in that direction?
Well, I don't know of anything off the top of my head. I do know some of our writers, they do want to reach out to younger people. They want to bring some of the work that they've done, some of the writing they've done to, the juvenile facilities. They especially want to reach out to their family members because there's often, a whole family tree, cousins and nephews and children, and use writing as a way to express what they've gone through and what they hope that their younger family members will not have to go through. I'm kind of hoping that it'll just start changing in general. that one of the things that feels like has happened in the United States is that originally the idea of prison was you went into prison to think over what you've done and to change and to come out and not do it again, to be a different person. And what it's turned into is more punitive. So I just read Dwayne Bett's book about being in prison and some of the horrendous conditions over in Virginia, and I know men are warehoused in San Quentin, and they're not being given programming, they're not given skills. And also when you think about the technological revolution that's happened, if you imagine, if you've been locked up for like the last 15 years and then you came out and now it's, cell phones and internet and Wi-Fi and how would you cope with all of that? And I'm just hoping that there'll be a sort of an awakening in the United States that punishing people is not working. And also, of course, the big issue is that, well, there's two. One is that there's a lot of people with mental illness that are locked up that really, that's not where they should be. They need help. They need services. They need therapy. They need medication. They need guidance. There's also an older, aging prison population. So now we're starting to see a lot of health problems. So people in their 60s and 70s with, diabetes and knee replacements and dementia and all this. And so why are they still locked up? Because they're not a harm to society any longer. So I keep hoping there'll be kind of a change in how we deal with different people in the population that maybe need help in a different way.
The stuff you do, as I understand it, is going to kind of high-functioning folks. I mean,
Right.
they're selected, they're
Right.
already writing.
Yeah.
You can talk about kind of the techniques of the craft. And I'd imagine there's a substantial population in prison who are partly there because they weren't very high
Yes,
functioning and
right.
they didn't have
Right.
access to good jobs and literacy and all of those things.
Right.
That is, do you see things happening for those folks that might be helpful?
Well, I know that, for example, at Lino Lakes, there's a really big push for people to get their GED, so that there is, a very strong education department to help people become literate. Yeah, I mean, I think again, each facility approaches it a different way, but I think there is, in general, the idea of encouraging people to become more literate, get their GEDs, get the basics. And that's Minnesota. I don't know about other states. I don't know what's available in other states.
Minnesota sounds like a kind of paradise.
Yeah.
You're going to have to
Right.
go to prison. Go
Yeah.
in Minnesota.
Go
yeah.
Minnesota, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep. Well, I mean, and basically the reason someone's in prison is because they made a decision at some point, right? And that decision probably came out of a dysfunctional environment, for the most part. I think that's what's happened, and that dysfunctionality it's kind of all through the community. There's, I'm sure you probably know about the movie The 13th, and just this has been an ongoing situation in the United States for quite a while of so many people in the black community especially ending up locked up. It's a systematic form of racism, and where it really has to begin is with children. What has to happen is there needs to be a way to educate ourselves as children to be more understanding and tolerant and community focused, and to learn to take care of each other, and that we're all important and we're all unique and we all deserve every opportunity to grow and develop. So that's the change I would like to see in our culture.
Do you have it in mind to bring the kind of experience you've had in the prisons out in your own memoir stuff? I mean, in other words, do you have it in mind to tell people what you've seen and tell people what you think needs to happen, and bring about what you think needs to happen in society?
Well, I have a lot of stories, and they're all over different cultures and different eras and different kinds of relationships. I've been out of the box all my whole life, and so sharing my experience of teaching writing in the prison has been definitely a part of that. But I'm not so much the person to educate in terms of like non-fictional journalistic type of writing. I'm much more on the telling my own personal story, kind of lyrical poet, coming to understand myself, self-reflection. That's kind of more the type of writer I am. I had an article in Poets and Writers magazine a couple years ago about my experience of writing in the prison. I have a collection of essays I'm working on called Unlikely Predicaments, and there's a couple of essays that will be about the prison in that. And I also have been working on a craft memoir book. So it's memoir mixed with writing exercises and writing tips, how to do the kind of writing classes that I teach. What I've used, the prompts I've used, the poems I've used, particular things to know about that population. So writing in the prison is part of that. Yeah. I don't know if later on it might, I might need a little time to have that, to be able to look back and really understand the experience totally.
Thank you.